we want to buy it. And that was the best news I'd ever heard.
In 1957, Hollywood put out a Western that broke every rule. While studios chased color and spectacle, director Delmer Daves went the other way. He shot 3:10 to Yuma in black and white. No vast Technicolor skies, no blazing orange sunsets, just two men locked in a quiet test of will. It wasn't the kind of Western built on showdowns and six shooters. The tension didn't come from gunfire, it came from silence, from a stare that lasted too long, from a man deciding whether his word was worth dying for. So how did a modest black and white Western end up reshaping the genre? Let's dig into 20 strange, overlooked facts about 3:10 to Yuma, the movie that turned restraint into power. The film was shot in black and white when color ruled Hollywood. In 1957, when Westerns glowed in the saturated colors of the searchers and gunfight at the OK Corral, Delmer Daves made a quiet rebellion. 3:10 to Yuma would not shimmer in gold and crimson but in shadows. Columbia Pictures had color stock ready, but Daves wanted something different. Black and white. Some called it a financial decision, but others knew better. They knew Dave wanted the movie drained of glamour. He wanted nothing left but faces, fear, and the thin line between decency and despair. The choice turned every scene into a moral terrain. The Arizona sky pressed down with blinding heat, while the streets of Contention City folded into sharp angles and narrow shadows. You could read a man's conscience right off his face. Dan Evans's worry sat heavy beneath the noon light. Ben Wade's charm lived in the half-dark. Instead of the polished glow that filled other Westerns, Daves gave audiences a world where sunlight punished and darkness seduced. The film no longer behaved like a Western, it moved like a noir, spoken in shadows and silence. Film historians later noted that Daves used contrast as emotion, light for obligation, and shadow for temptation. No color film of the era carried such tension. The absence of hue became a character of its own, stripping the mythic West of romance and exposing its soul. 3:10 to Yuma didn't need color to burn. Its power came from the gray places where right and wrong looked painfully alike. 3:10 to Yuma idea began as a lean, brutal short story by Elmore Leonard. Before the cameras rolled, 3:10 to Yuma existed as only 7 pages in Dime Western magazine. Elmore Leonard's 1950 short story was pure simplicity. A deputy, a prisoner, a train, and a deadline. No wives, no debts, no moral speeches, just two men waiting for the whistle. Yet in that waiting, Leonard found terror. His prose was stripped bare, the dialogue clipped like dry twigs in the desert. When screenwriter Halstead Wells adapted it, he saw a deeper human struggle inside that silence. He gave Dan Evans a farm on the brink of failure, a wife who begged him not to go, and sons who watched to see if their father still had courage. He gave Ben Wade charm, patience, and wit, the kind of villain who could almost talk a man into betrayal. The result wasn't just a Western anymore, it was a test of integrity disguised as a search. Elmore Leonard later said he was pleased with what the filmmakers had done. They caught the feeling, he remarked years on. Real suspense isn't the gun, it's the waiting. Dave's version turned what began as a short, gritty magazine story into something more profound. The gunfight became a test of nerve, the journey a study in what men hide behind courage. What started as pulp ended as reflection. That is why 3:10 to Yuma still holds power today, not through violence, but through the uneasy silence before it. Director Delmer Daves turned pulp into parable and got everyone's attention. Director Delmer Daves had made Westerns before, but never one this contained and deliberate. 3:10 to Yuma unfolds like a clock wound too tight, its suspense measured in heartbeats. Daves stripped away the genre's distractions. No cavalry charges, no sweeping horizons. Just a rancher and an outlaw trapped in a single room as time closes in. When the film reached theaters, critic Bosley Crowther of the New York Times immediately recognized its uniqueness. He called it a Western of tension and character, not spectacle. Comparisons to High Noon came quickly, though Daves's approach was sharper, more grounded. He wasn't chasing virtue, he was studying pressure. The camera moved like a pulse, shifting between the men inside and the worried faces outside, until the whole town seemed caught in one long, unbroken breath. In one remarkable sequence, rain begins to fall as Evans walks Wade to the train. The camera follows their silhouettes through the downpour, the train's whistle echoing like judgment. Daves knew precisely what he was saying. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to walk through it anyway. By the end, the audience wasn't sure who the hero was, and that was the point. Daves had turned a pulp western into a meditation on humanity. The critics saw it, the audience felt it, and Hollywood never quite forgot it. The studio paid $100,000 for the script rights. In 1956, $100,000 could build a small town, buy a handful of new Chevrolets, or bankroll 3 westerns at once. Yet that was the figure Columbia Pictures wrote on the check for $310 to Yuma. The deal began quietly when producer Robert Aldrich's company and David Heilweil's associates purchased the rights to Elmore Leonard's short story. They brought in screenwriter Halstead Wells to stretch Leonard's sparse 20-page tale into something that could hold a full-length feature. When Columbia stepped in, it wasn't just purchasing paper, it was buying a tone. Wells's script traded gunfights for glances and explosions for hesitation. It had no sweeping cavalry charges, no outlaw armies, just 2 men waiting in silence for a train. Columbia executives could have passed it by, but they sensed something new in the tension, something that played on the nerves rather than the senses. The $100,000 payout was enormous for what began as a pulp western. An entire low-budget film could be made for the same amount. Aldrich and Heilweil's companies pocketed a small fortune and offloaded the financial risk to the studio. It was a gamble on mood, on character, and on the idea that audiences could sit through quiet dread instead of spectacle. And it worked. That single check transformed a modest short story into a studio prestige project. In a decade obsessed with color, Columbia bet on black and white morality, and silence proved more potent than any gunshot. Real stunt professionals were not credited, but their bruises were real. Every Western stands on the shoulders of men who fall. They built 310 to Yuma, John Kaysen, Jack N. Young, Buzz Henry, and Brad Harris. They were names that flash past in the credits, if at all. They were the hidden engine of Delmer Daves's film. Men who made danger look like rhythm and pain look like grace. The movie opens with a stagecoach ambush, dust lifting, hooves hammering the ground, and gunfire cracking through the heat. What looked wild on screen was, in truth, a dance of danger. Horses were trained to drop at the pull of a hidden wire. Stunt performers timed their dives to pass within inches of spinning wheels. Every fall was calculated, every motion rehearsed until instinct took over. No soft mats were waiting off camera. No clever edits to hide mistakes. What you see are real bodies meeting real earth with the risk of splintered bones or concussions. Later, as the story narrows to the tense run toward the train, stunt doubles step in again, unseen, uncredited. They sprint through smoke and rain, doubling for Van Heflin and Glenn Ford as bullets snap through the air. The shot lasts seconds, but the preparation fills hours. Camera crews crouched behind walls, handlers steadied horses, and the stunt performers did it all again until the rhythm matched the scene's heartbeat. Their work holds the film together. Without those unheralded professionals, 310 to Yuma would be words on a page. They brought breath, bruises, and authenticity, the kind of risk that can't be faked. Their names may be forgotten, but their precision gave the film its weight, and their silence, like the stories, made the danger real. The final run in the film to the train wasn't chaos, it was choreography. It looked frantic, but it wasn't. The final run in 310 to Yuma, the rain, the shouting crowd, the desperate sprint toward the approaching train, was measured to be the second. Director Delmer Daves planned it not as an outburst, but as a pattern. Each beat of action had its own rhythm. The crash of boots through puddles, the scrape of metal, the breath between gunfire. Rain machines poured over the set, not for realism alone, but for texture. Silver streaks cut through black and white film, creating a contrast that made motion look sharper. Daves rehearsed with stopwatches in hand. Van Heflin's run had to match camera rotation. Camera rotation had to meet Glenn Ford's movement, and Ford's fall had to land exactly where the frame broke to the next shot. One misstep meant an entire reel wasted. Extras learned to reload on cue. Horses walked through the scene to know their marks. The train whistle was timed to hit the climax, not a sound effect, but the real engine arriving. By the end, what audiences saw as chaos was precision, wearing a mask of panic. The whole thing lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it carried the tension of a lifetime. That final sequence didn't just end the story. It revealed the craft beneath it, the discipline of control disguised as desperation. The mistakes in the shooting reveal how it was really made. You can see them if you look closely. A cloud that shifts shape halfway through a scene. A chair that moves when no one touches it. Shadows that lengthen, then vanish. On paper, these are mistakes. On film, they're a record of the desert's will. 310 to Yuma was shot on real soil, in Bisbee, Sedona, and Old Tucson, where the sun refused to wait for a second take. Crews measured light by instinct, not instruments. Once it slipped, they raced to guess where it would fall the next day. There were no playback screens, no computers to erase a stray reflection. Each shot was a wager against time. Inside the hotel, continuity was broken constantly. The clock behind Van Heflin jumps 10 minutes between cuts. Coffee cups trade hands, a hat disappears, then returns. It wasn't carelessness, it was endurance. Film stock was expensive. The weather was unpredictable. If the scene played, they moved on. Those irregularities became part of Yuma's language. They gave the film a heartbeat, a reminder that human hands were building it piece by piece. While other westerns polished every frame, Yuma kept its seams visible. It feels lived in because it was. Imperfection, in this case, became its signature, a truth the desert wouldn't let them hide. The film was shot all over southern Arizona, Tucson, Sedona, ranches, and playas. The production of 310 to Yuma wandered across southern Arizona like a moving caravan. The town of contention, where much of the story unfolds, was built from the ground up at Old Tucson Studios, just west of Tucson. Those weathered facades, the saloons, storefronts, and hotel porches gave the film a sense of lived-in grit. When the camera shifts to the supposed outskirts of Bisbee, the crew had moved north to Sedona, where the red cliffs around Mogollon Drive offered a harsher, more exposed setting. Texas Canyon, with its jagged rock towers near Dragoon, supplied a natural arena for ambush scenes and stagecoach chases. Farther east, the open plains of Empire Ranch and Wilcox added a sense of distance and endurance, the kind of land where a man's resolve wears thin. Each location served a precise purpose. Old Tucson for human drama, Sedona for isolation, the ranchlands for the vastness of pursuit. Together, they built a geography that felt both continuous and alive. The shifts in soil, color, and light made every transition believable. When Evans and Wade travel across those lands, the audience moves with them through real terrain, not a stitched set. The Arizona desert became more than a backdrop. It became the moral landscape where courage, fear, and exhaustion took shape. Old Tucson functioned as a backlot, stage, and staging area for extras and horses. Old Tucson was more than a set. It was a production engine. The compound housed buildings dressed as a western town, contention rooms, weapons rooms, stables, barns, and everything needed under one roof. Extras, stunt horses, and props could all be marshaled on site. That allowed the crew to shoot credible historical streets and simultaneously manage horses, riders, costume changes, and crowd control without traveling far. As a backlot, it simplified logistics. Shoot one street facade in daylight, rotate costumes and horses behind the scenes, then shoot again with fresh angles. The proximity cut down on transport, on weather mismatches, and on the risk of animal or cast movement over long distances. It let Dave's crew maintain consistency in light, horizon, and architecture. Because Old Tucson had been used in prior westerns, it carried built-in authenticity in dust, wear, and wooden facades already weathered. That authenticity rubbed off on 310 to Yuma. The streets felt lived in, not freshly painted. Speak to old guides or Western aficionados, and they'll show you the same three mountain peaks visible in many Old Tucson films. They appear in 310 to Yuma, too. In short, Old Tucson was the film's home base, its workshop, and its dream factory all at once. The music from George Dunning's score and Frankie Lane's title song binds the film emotionally. From its opening moments, 310 to Yuma frames its moral tension through sound. Composer George Dunning wrote a score that moves like a heartbeat beneath the dust, quiet but steady. The title song, with lyrics by Ned Washington and performed by Frankie Lane, opens and closes the story like a prayer carried on the wind. Lane's voice has the ache of a man who's seen too much sun. His delivery feels worn, like a man who's carried too many miles in his throat. The lyrics talk of buzzards, fate, and judgment. They send a message that judgment waits for everyone, even the good ones. As the film opens, that song floats over the desert's still air, the chords creeping in like a distant warning. By the closing scene, the melody drifts back, quieter now, carrying the weight of what has passed. Between those 2 points, Dunning's score whispers under every hesitation, every stare across the hotel room, every footstep toward that waiting train. As the lyrics go, there is a lonely train called the 310 to Yuma. The pounding of the wheels is more like a mournful sigh. The music doesn't decorate 310 to Yuma, it defines it. Glenn Ford's Ben Wade, the villain who spoke softly and terrified everyone anyway. Glenn Ford had built his career on restraint. He didn't waste words, didn't overplay emotion. In 3:10 to Yuma, that instinct became his most potent weapon. While most Western antagonists shouted or swaggered, Ford's Ben Wade smiled. He looked, paused, and said almost nothing. That silence did the damage. Critics at the time called it the calmest cruelty ever filmed. Peter Ford, Glenn's son, later explained in interviews that his father disliked dialogue-heavy scripts. He trusted the camera to catch what he was thinking, he said. On set, Ford would study Van Heflin's movements, then undercut them with a glance or a smirk. It wasn't improvisation, it was control. The quiet was deliberate, each pause calculated to unnerve. Watch him during the hotel room scenes. Wade sits unarmed, watching Evans pace. You can almost hear his thoughts. You don't believe you can do this, but I'll make you think you can. That psychological sparring drives the film's tension. Ford wasn't playing a brute, he was playing intelligence, a man whose weapon was patience. The performance redefined the Western villain. Bosley Crowther wrote that Ford made the devil courteous. Decades later, critics still cite it as one of the most complex turns of his career. A performance built not on fury, but on the terrible confidence of a man who doesn't need to raise his voice. Van Heflin's Dan Evans was the moral center that held the film. Van Heflin was never a flashy actor. His power came from steadiness. In 3:10 to Yuma, that quality made him unforgettable. Playing Dan Evans, the drought-stricken rancher who risks his life for $200, Heflin grounded the film's moral weight. While Glenn Ford's Ben Wade moves through the story like a cat playing with its prey, Heflin stands firm, jaw tight, voice even. The Laurel Award Committee noticed. In 1958, Heflin was named top male action star for the role, a rare honor for a performance defined not by brawls, but by conscience. Evans is an ordinary man pulled into extraordinary danger. His farm is dying. His wife has lost faith. That $200 means survival. When he agrees to escort Wade to the station, he's buying dignity as much as security. Watch his face in the scene by the well. The moment he says, "A man's got to earn his keep somehow." That line isn't about money. It's about being seen as worth something again. Heflin plays it without flourish. You see fatigue under courage, fear under duty. Against Ford's magnetic villainy, he becomes the film's quiet heart, a man who wins by simply staying upright. The result is one of the most human portrayals in any Western of its time. Peter Ford, the son who revealed what Glenn never said on camera. When Criterion reissued 3:10 to Yuma, one of its key interviews came from Peter Ford, Glenn's son and biographer. His recollections peeled back the myth surrounding his father. Glenn Ford, he said, was meticulous, rarely the gunslinger audiences imagined, more the craftsman who built characters piece by piece. Peter remembered visiting sets where his father rehearsed alone, pacing through lines without sound, testing facial shifts in a mirror. He believed an actor's face was his dialogue, Peter explained. That discipline shaped 3:10 to Yuma. Ford didn't rely on dramatic speeches. He rehearsed silences like the way a jaw tightens, a brow softens, how stillness can turn menacing. Off camera, Peter said his father was courteous but intense, protective of co-stars. He would step aside afterwards to compliment Van Heflin, calling him the anchor of the story. That respect between leads shows in every frame. Neither actor dominates, they balance each other like opposing forces of the same code. Through Peter's memories, the film's elegance becomes clearer. Ford wasn't improvising coolness. He was crafting it, piece by piece, with the focus of someone who couldn't leave a detail alone. The grin, the slight shift of the jaw, the easy hand near the holster, none of it was casual. Ford understood that real menace doesn't raise its voice. It waits, calm and confident, until everyone else goes quiet. Elmore Leonard, the author of 3:10 to Yuma, watched his short story outgrow him. Before 3:10 to Yuma became a legend, it was just a 1953 short story in Dime Western magazine. Its author, Elmore Leonard, was still working as a copywriter, earning $25 per story. When Criterion interviewed him decades later, Leonard smiled at the memory. "They took my little story," he said, "and turned it into a moral showdown." Leonard's version is simple. Two men, a hotel room, a train coming through. The movie stretches that simplicity into something almost Shakespearean. Director Delmer Daves and screenwriter Halstead Wells expanded character names, added the drought-stricken ranch, and built tension that felt biblical. Leonard admitted that the changes worked. They didn't ruin it. They found more story in the silences, he said. He remained fascinated by how Glenn Ford transformed his villain. In Leonard's pages, Wade is cocky. In the film, he's almost philosophical. Glenn slowed him down, Leonard noted, made him dangerous because he didn't have to prove anything. Watching the adaptation years later, Leonard wasn't bitter. He sounded proud. "It's strange," he said, "seeing something you wrote walk away from you and walk taller." That humility mirrors the film itself, a modest story that grew into one of the most quietly daring westerns ever filmed. The film's economy was its hidden weapon. 3:10 to Yuma runs a lean 92 minutes, yet not a frame feels missing. Directors Delmer Daves and Al Clark crafted the film with the precision of a ticking watch. It was tight, spare, and always on the verge of breaking. The story doesn't wander. It tightens. Every cut, every silence, every shift of light feels chosen. Daves wasn't chasing spectacle, he was trimming it away. Clark's editing finds suspense in rhythm. He moves between the cramped hotel room and the wide, sunburned streets outside, cutting from faces trapped in shadow to landscapes that look endless but unreachable. Inside, the air seems to press on the walls. Outside, the horizon mocks them with space they can't use. That contrast keeps the film breathing yet uneasy. The transitions are never decorative. Each one feels like a step closer to something final. When Clark holds onto a face too long, you think the time is dragging. When he cuts early, the silence hits harder. The film doesn't hurry, it waits. And that waiting becomes its weapon, leaving people yearning for more. In less than an hour and a half, Daves and Clark turned economy into style. They proved that a Western didn't need sprawling dust storms or drawn-out duels to feel epic. Suspense could live in how a man shifts his weight or how a clock ticks toward a train no one wants to meet. Interestingly, 3:10 to Yuma ends when we least expect it. In 92 minutes, Daves and Clark made a Western that beats like a pulse. Every cut another heartbeat closer to the train. Criterion Restoration gave 3:10 to Yuma its heartbeat back. When Criterion restored 3:10 to Yuma in 2013, it wasn't just saving a film, it was uncovering what time had buried it. The 4K digital restoration stripped away decades of haze, bringing back the film's deep blacks and blinding whites. Suddenly, the Arizona sun looked merciless again, and the shadows that once hid Ben Wade's smile carried weight. For a story built in contrast, the restoration returned its soul. The uncompressed monaural soundtrack completed the revival. George Duning's score came through with quiet strength, and you could finally catch the small details like the drag of a boot, a door hinge moaning, the soft knock of a pistol on wood. Those sounds carry half the film's emotion. Now they sit exactly where they belong. Criterion's Blu-ray didn't just stop with the visuals. It added 2 interviews that opened the story from the inside. Elmore Leonard, who wrote the original short story, talks about how the filmmakers captured the tension he imagined, the suspense that hides in silence. Peter Ford, Glenn Ford's son, recalls how his father built menace through calmness rather than cruelty. Their voices turn the restoration of 3:10 to Yuma into something more than restoration. It becomes a record of memory. Watching this version feels different. It lets us see and hear the film the way it always wanted to be felt. The dust, the silence, the heat, it's all there again, sharp as memory. 3:10 to Yuma doesn't just look restored, it feels alive in its best form to this day. The film was added to the Library of Congress National Film Registry. In December 2012, 3:10 to Yuma earned a new kind of immortality as the Library of Congress selected it for the National Film Registry. For a film to be inducted into the National Film Registry, the film must be judged culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, a designation that elevates it above mere entertainment, recasting it as part of America's collective memory. Unlike others, the registry label is not honorary fluff. It confirms what many cinephiles already suspect. 3:10 to Yuma is more than a Western. It shaped what the Western could do. Its visuals still look sharp, its performances still crackle. The clarity of its moral tensions, the quiet ferocity of Glenn Ford's Ben Wade, Van Heflin's taut restraint. These were achievements that stand the test of decades. Technically, the film still holds up. Its black and white starkness, its carefully composed frames, and the way light and shadow weigh on each character all contribute to its aesthetic signature. Dramatically, it remains a kind of duel played in small rooms and open spaces, a delicate balance of tension over violence. Its induction to the National Film Registry says this: "We ought to preserve the film, not just as an artifact, but as an active example." You can tell 3:10 to Yuma wasn't built to chase popularity. It lasts because it feels honest and acted without show, edited like every second counted. That's what the registry really honors, not just because it's old or well-liked, but because it still catches your attention when you sit down and watch it now. The picture still cuts clean, the faces still hold weight, and the silence still knows how to speak. The movie earned over $1.85 million in rentals. In 1957, 3:10 to Yuma earned approximately $1.85 million in U.S. and Canadian rentals. By the standards of its time, that was respectable for a modest Western, not a runaway hit. Studios in that era often expected B pictures and lean Westerns to pull their weight modestly, not dominate the box office. Ticket prices in the 1950s were lower than they are today. Back then, even a top feature might charge under $1. The lower margins meant studios needed tighter control over cost. Putting 3:10 to Yuma in black and white instead of expensive color stock was a practical decision. Location choices, sparse sets, limited extras, they all reflect a production aware of its financial tightrope. Yet even with that caution, the film manages ambition. The stark contrasts, the disciplined editing, and the choice to lean into character tension over spectacle were all safer bets financially and artistically. The modest box office allowed the film to be lean without being empty. Its solid rental performance gave Columbia room to back its bold choices. In a time when a saturated Western in color might be the safe path, 3:10 to Yuma proved that a tighter film could still achieve impact. As noted by film critics, it is one of the best Westerns of the 1950s. Praised for its progressive insight and the innovative direction by Delmer Daves that focused more on psychological tension than sheer spectacle. The casts spent 2 days in Sedona to capture a desert dream. They arrived in Sedona with only 2 days carved out for shooting. It felt like it was not enough, but just enough if you move like a blade. 3:10 to Yuma's cast and crew spent just 2 days filming exteriors in Sedona before packing up and moving on. Picture this. The sun is already hot by mid-morning. Tents are being set up fast and the red dust is getting into everything. Your shoes, your lenses, and even your food. Yet this didn't stop them. Filming went on. Crew members laid down the track while others fixed the microphones. The horse wranglers crept, keeping the animals steady. Behind them, the cliffs rose high and still, and the horizon looked wide enough to get lost in as it felt both empty and full of promise of a great shoot. They had to get the main cast shots first. Ford astride his horse, helmet, hat, bone white in the glare. Van Heflin stepping out of a wagon with a stoic stoop as the wind throws dust about his boots. Every setup is timed. The light shifts, the shadows creep. They try to shoot as much as they can and hurry to pack up gear before that narrow window of sunlight passes. One miscalculated shadow, one missed lens flare, and the moment evaporates. Sedona was already changing with housing developments creeping outward, film-friendly terrain giving way to pavement. However, 2 days didn't allow for luxury. There was no time for reshoots or perfect placement. You shoot until the sun drops and hope it holds enough of what you wanted. Those 2 days in Sedan burned fast. The footage they took home carried the smell of the desert, the sweat, film stock, and dust. You can see the hurry in the cuts and the way faces turn before the camera's ready. It's the kind of pressure that never really leaves a picture. Every shot after Sedona feels like it's still chasing that light till this day. But that's not all. The film helped to popularize the phrase Yuma in Cuban speech. Decades later, 3:10 to Yuma would be remembered far from its Arizona dust and for the phrase Yuma. In Cuba, the word Yuma, or La Yuma, came to mean foreign country, or simply the United States. And this was because of the movie. It was a strange legacy that 3:2 to Yuma would reshape how people talk about the world. According to language commentators, Cuban audiences encountered 3:10 to Yuma in the late 1950s, and the title Yuma stuck as a shorthand for America. This was not a literal reference to the town, but something more mythic. Imagine a teenager in Havana, scrambling toward a screen in 1958, seeing Ben Wade step into the frame, hearing that gun crack in black and white. Somehow the Yuma name stuck in their memory. That name shuttled across seas, entered slang, and now lives in everyday phrases. Pa La Yuma means to the U.S. Isa Yuma means that foreigner. It's odd, but it's real. It shows how films don't live just in theaters. They flicker into culture, language, and memory. Thanks to preservation, 2013 Criterion restoration, the interviews, and the registry status today, 3:10 to Yuma isn't just a film of the past. It still breathes. And in some distant Havana neighborhood, a teenager might still say Yuma without ever knowing Ben Wade's name. But he carries the echo of that desert train, that silent showdown. Outro, what do you think of the movie 3:10 to Yuma? And which of these facts do you find interesting? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And check out the following video popping up on your screen now. You will like it.